Hi, everyone. Welcome to our mentorship roundtable with Isabel Castro. My name is Chris Everett, and I'm the program manager at the Southern Documentary Fund. And the Southern Documentary Fund is a nonprofit that cultivates media made in or about the American South. We believe that media has the power to change lives, and we provide makers with resources to champion Southern storytelling, serving as a leading advocate, providing filmmakers and artists with professional support, filmmaking grants, and fiscal sponsorship. From concept to completion, 4-time Emmy-nominated documentary filmmaker Isabel Castro will give us an overview today of the process used in her latest film, MIJA. Again, thank you everyone for joining us today. And again, like I was saying earlier, we'll definitely have a portion of this presentation for you guys to ask questions to Isabel. So definitely use the raise hand button function on the Zoom, and we'll definitely get to your question. But again, thank you guys for joining us today. Isabel, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much all for joining. I really enjoy these conversations, these types of conversations, because I think it's important to demystify how films get made. Like, I think that oftentimes it feels really overwhelming. I mean, every time I start a project, I get completely overwhelmed. And so I like talking about how I did it in case it might be useful to anybody else. And so I'm very honored and excited to be here with y'all. So yeah, I just wrapped on a film called MIJA. Chris and I actually met through a fellowship we both got at Firelight, and it just premiered at Sundance this year, and it got picked up by Disney, and now it's going to theaters, and then there's an FX deal, and all of these things seem very big, but it all started very small. And so I think it's important to remember, and it's an important thing for me to remember, that like every project just starts with an idea, and just taking things one step at a time. So I started this project in the summer of 2019. Prior to that, I got a fellowship at Concordia Studio, which if any of y'all are interested in, I can put you in touch with the woman who runs it. I quite frankly don't understand her process by which she chooses fellows, but I had this fellowship opportunity. She had reached out to me, and through that fellowship, I was just kind of bouncing around ideas about what I wanted my first feature to be. I knew I wanted to do a story about immigration. I knew I wanted to do a story about immigration in a way that felt different from other stories I'd done about immigration or other stories that I'd seen about immigration. And I finally landed on the idea of wanting to have it be a music doc while also being about immigration. That was kind of where I landed. That was the basic bare minimum of what I wanted to do, knew I wanted to do. And separately, I for a while, by the time I was developing it, for a while, I'd wanted to do a story about mixed status families. And so looking at the ways that families engage with each other when everybody in the family has a different legal status. And so those were kind of my terms for development. And then I just was reading a lot. I was just, for me, development, when people talk about development and the way that they do it, I think it's a really personal process for each person. For me, it's just there is no rhyme or reason. I read, I go on Google, I just go on Instagram. I just, when I'm in the development period, I just open my brain to absorbing stuff. If that, that's a very basic explanation of it. I go to museums, and in this development process, I came across an article about this musician named Kuko, who was blowing up he had this article in the California Sunday Magazine about how he was supporting his family with the money that he was raising, and how he came from an undocumented family, and that how his success in music was helping elevate him and the family. And I thought, oh wow, this is really ticking all of the all of the things that I am looking to do. And so I reached out to his manager, Doris Munoz, and she like out the gate was like, listen, I'm just out the gate, I was very transparent about the kind of film I wanted to make. I said, this is not your typical documentary. I'm not asking to do 5 sit-down interviews and like some B-roll, which by the way is like, there are many films that I love that do that as well. But I just, for this film, wanted to take a different kind of stylistic approach. I told her, like, I want it to be verite driven. I'm going to be very embedded in the day-to-day life of in filming. And I think that when she presented it to Kuko, he seemed a little bit like not ready for that level of commitment. And so I put it aside. I put it aside for many months. And yet I kept on coming back to it. I like kept on feeling like this was like the right story. And I was kept on trying to figure out like, okay, if he doesn't want me to film every day with him, like what does it look like instead? And so in having more and more conversations with Doris, his manager, I realized that she was in a similar position too. Like she had an undocumented family. She was doing this work as a way to support them. And I started to kind of shift my focus from him to her and trying to understand. I wanted to understand also what like a music manager did. And so anyway, long story short, she invites me to film in New York. I fly out to New York. I'm a cinematographer. So I fly out with my gear. I stayed with my parents. I shot for 4 days. And that is like, you know, my first piece of advice is just never to ask when you're starting a project, just don't ask for permission. Just go out there and just like to your best ability and just check it out. You know, like I think that oftentimes in development, the times that I get kind of stuck is when I'm like waiting for someone to say yes to me. And so at least my process is just like, just go check it out and gather more information. Sometimes that's obviously cost prohibitive, but I will say that like, it's part of the reason I like to find stories that are nearby or find stories that are within driving distance, because I just think it's so important, at least in my process, to just like get out there. Just like so much of documentary is just, in my opinion, just being present. And so I went to New York, I shot for 4 days. I came back and I was like, I think we have a story here. And the story, as I saw it from that first trip, was that the film would be about the children of immigrants and the ways that they support their families in the music industry, and the ways that they kind of are wrestling with professional lives in a creative space when like the stakes are so high for them to succeed. And so I came back and I kind of like started writing about it. I had that footage, and Doris lived in LA. And so when she got back to LA, I met back up with her in LA and I just started filming, and then like it just started evolving. So again, to go back to that fellowship, I got really, really lucky because that fellowship came with $100,000 to develop something. So that's very unusual. And that's basically how we ran most of production was with that amount of money, because what happened next is that we made a sizzle. So I started shooting, I shot for maybe 2 or 3 months. And then we used that money to cut a sizzle. So to like put together a work sample that we could take out to financiers. we cut together the sizzle. So Concordia Studio has a fellowship, and they also have a production company and a financing arm. And at the end of this process, 3 months, I go to Concordia, the other part of the company, and I pitched the project, kind of expecting them to finance it, and they reject it. So that's another kind of learning lesson that I'd like to impart, is that I was really demoralized in that moment, because I was like, oh shit, like I now have to go out and raise like $900,000, $800,000, and like I kind of had gotten a little bit prematurely cocky, thinking that like they were just going to finance it. And when they said no, it really threw me into a tailspin, and thinking like, okay, maybe this isn't as good of a project as I thought it was. Maybe it wasn't. Maybe like they're like executives and they're professionals, like maybe they don't see in it what I see in it, and maybe that's a problem. So my second piece of advice is just to always trust your gut. Like, even I was a first time filmmaker, I was told the budget was too high, there wasn't an audience for the film, and that it just was too small. Like they kept on saying it's just too small. And I was like, but we're talking about like pop musicians. And between us, in a circle of confidence, a lot of the rejection, a lot of the language that has been used to reject me along the way, I have interpreted as like kind of coded racism. Like when people say to me like this isn't big enough, I hear like you're not understanding that this is huge for immigrant audiences. Like huge for immigrant audiences. There are millions of immigrants in this country. I have heard this film doesn't have an audience dozens of times. I've heard that phrase dozens of times, and that's how I always interpret it. And so I think one big piece of advice that I'm constantly giving to people is that like never take rejection personally. Like there's so many systemic reasons that people are rejecting these things along the way, and you just can't, like, you just have to trust your gut. And I was making a film that I really wanted to have when I was younger, and that was really emotionally resonant to me, and that was the thing that really kind of continued, like was the gas in my engine, as opposed to any external validation, because there was not a lot of that, especially at the beginning. And so they said no. And then the next thing we did was, so we had a pitch deck and we had a sizzle in hand. So we were prepared. So we were rejected, and we said, okay, that's all right, we're going to move on. And we went to Impact Partners. So Impact Partners came on as one of the first, actually the first financier, and they're wonderful. They're fantastic. They're obviously like pretty competitive to get support from, but if you're able to, like, I could not recommend them more highly. And the way that Impact Partners works is that it's like a group of they've organized a group of financiers that come into your project either through soft grants. What soft grants are like money that you don't have to pay back, or through equity financing. Equity financing means that they put money into your film, but there's an expectation that they're going to make it back. And you basically, it's kind of like they're investing in your film. And so Impact Partners does mostly equity financing, but they basically have this like big group. They did something that's really smart, which is that they organize this big group of like very, very wealthy people who are interested in supporting independent film. And they said, okay, we're going to curate a slate of films for y'all to look at and decide whether you want to invest in them. And so that's who we went to first. And through Impact, we were able to raise most of our equity financing. So our budget was about $900,000. About half of it was raised. Oh, I'm so sorry. About half of it was raised through equity financing. The other people that came on earlier were Cinereach. They're no longer around, unfortunately, or are not around in the same capacity, but they came on early. And then another thing that happened is that we applied to this program called Catalyst, which is run by Sundance. which basically allows you to pitch your project. It's kind of actually similar idea to Impact. Like you pitch your project to a group of people that like want to invest in film. Those investors range from wealthy individuals to organizations or production companies that have money that they want to include. And so pitched it to Catalyst. We got more equity financing through that. And then we were off to the races. I mean, the other thing that we did is that we applied to every single grant under the sun. And we got a few of them. We got Sundance, we got Firelight, we got Chicken and Egg, we got an NBC grant, we got Cal Humanities. I mean, but we literally, I mean, most of my 2020 was spent in front of a computer, just like applying to every single thing that I could find. We got into IDA Enterprise Grant. We were rejected from that twice before we got it. So third piece of advice, you just have to like keep on applying. You just have to keep making your film and keep on applying and keep on bothering people. So so that's kind of how financing came together. I mean, it sounds easy now when I'm like saying all of this now, but it obviously was a nightmare along the way. But through those efforts, we were able to get fully financed, which it required us to work. The production team, me, had to work for very little. And a lot of the money mainly just went to overhead costs of just making sure that we could get flights and get travel and, just pay for the overhead overhead costs. And then, obviously post is always, at least for me, the most expensive part of production because I shoot. And so I just wanted to make sure I had a really good editor on board. So anyway, that's how we kind of financed it. I wanted to show y'all the pitch deck that we made, just because I feel like these are useful to look at. And so I'm going to share my screen. Let me know. Did that work? Yeah. Yep. Okay, cool. So this is the pitch deck that we put together. I kind of just wanted to show it to you guys so you kind of get a sense for what it looked like. We put a lot of work into this, and this is what we ended up taking to all of our investors, all of our pitch meetings. And I kind of just wanted to walk through what it has. So we got a deck. So we came up with all the copy, and then we got a deck designer. We gathered the images, that's the process by which we made it. It includes a synopsis, includes photos from the footage. Some of this footage didn't even make the film. A director's statement. Here I am. The characters, just some kind of, this is just different synopses of all the characters in the film. And I talked about the style. And also, here's another thing, is that I think it's important to have your pitch deck reflect the style that you want to communicate. So we put a lot of effort there just to make sure that the style kind of reflected the tone of the film. We talked about how music was going to be a big part of the film. We ended up having an incredible roster of like Chicano musicians contribute music. And we had this musician called Helado Negro do the original composition. We talked about outreach and engagement. We talked about potential impact partnerships and had like preliminary conversations with them about whether they would be interested in something like this. We had marketing and distribution. I have a sizzle. This is the sizzle that we cut. I have a scene sample. So the family that was separated, her brother, who's pictured here, was deported to Mexico, and over the course of the pandemic, and her parents were undocumented, and over the course of filming, they get their green cards, so they reunite. And so I knew that this was like one of the most important scenes of the film. And so I wanted to basically highlight that in the pitch. this is a scene where they get their green cards. It's very moving, and so I wanted to include that as well. Here are our bios, pictures of us as daughters. Here's our timeline, which I'm very proud of sticking to it, because for these kinds of things, you just lie. Like you just lie. Like you don't know in documentary when you're gonna do it, and you kind of just lie and go into the pitch being like, yes, we will absolutely be done by January 2022, and it's really a crapshoot whether or not it'll work. And then yeah, that's it. I mean, it's a pretty straightforward pitch deck, but I just kind of wanted to show it as a way of for y'all to just kind of see the materials that that allowed for us to raise that money. And I'm happy to share the sizzle too. I'll drop it in later. Okay, wait. So, okay, I'm gonna go a little bit longer, and then I'm gonna open it up for questions. So, so we're making the film. We're fundraising simultaneously, and I would say at about the time that we knew that we were going to hit that editing timeline, we went out to folks to try to find a sales agent. So that's another kind of crucial part of the puzzle here. Having a sales agent for us really helped. Obviously not everyone is afforded that luxury, but I learned a lot along the way about the value of having a sales agent. So we had Cinetic attached to the project. And one of the reasons it helps is that like they can also kind of through the back door just like check in on how festivals are doing, you know? And so like that was something that they really don't have a lot of power over whether or not something gets programmed, but they do have relationships with film programmers and can kind of get a sense for what is and isn't making the cut, just to kind of like, so you can't anticipate it, because that's one of the most stressful parts of the process, is waiting back to hear back from festivals. So so we making the film, we're fundraising. I did a couple of fellowships, so we were workshopping the film along the way, and then we finished it. So we submitted at the beginning of October or the end of September to Sundance last summer, which was a total complete shit show. Obviously, like these timelines are somewhat arbitrary and we're all working around them, but realistically, like that, it was just a really hard couple of months to try to make that deadline. And when we got in, it was like a rough cut. It was like a little bit further than a rough cut, but it certainly wasn't like, you're basically just trying to run against the clock to see like the best, most advanced version that you can have of the film by that point. And then we submitted it. And then what they don't tell you is that you submit to Sundance and then you just have to keep going at the same pace. Like, even if you don't get in, you are still, if you do get in, you're going to have basically 2 months to finish the film. And if you do get in, and if you don't get in, you're going to hear about, like, you kind of have to like kind of act as if you're going to get in, just so that it would be ready in time. And then if you don't get in, you'll have a little bit of more time to edit, but what we were up against is also just like running out of the budget. So so that's a really stressful part of the process, but we ended up getting in, which was like the most joyful and also worst moment of my life, because as I said, getting in means that you have to finish the film in time by January. So Christmas was out the window. And so you kind of, we worked all the way through, premiered in January at Sundance, and then Cinetic, our sales agent, took it out to a couple of different buyers. So I'm just going to talk a little bit about the buying experience next, and how you kind of go out to distributors. But I did just want to pause and just see if anyone had any questions, because that's a lot to take in.
Yeah, feel free to raise your hand or just speak out. If you, and Jeanette, go ahead.
Okay, I had to unmute myself. Okay. Okay, wait, unmute myself. Okay. All right, so I do have several questions. So one, you got a sales agent, but you also already had impact partners. So I thought that impact partners also not only takes well, they came in, they didn't have soft grants for you all. They came in as equity, right? But then one, what does equity look like? Are you all able, because how I view them with equity partners is that you need to get paid up front, because you will probably not see any money. There's no, even if there's a back end deal, there's no, like, there will not be a back end for you to profit off of that. So that's number one. So wondering how does this equity work? And then the other thing is, and then I also thought that, like, the whole point of these equity investors is that they're looking to definitely make their money back, so that they themselves go out and do the distribution for you or brings you the deal. So if you could just, talk about those two things.
Yeah, those are excellent questions. And let me just start off by saying this stuff is like very complicated, and it really did take me a year just to feel like I somewhat understood it. So equity, the way that equity works is that people give you money. So let's say they give you $50,000. What you give them in return is the promise that if the film sells, they will so what it's called, the back end is what it's called is the waterfall. And the reason that it's called that is that, like, the money comes in and then it trickles down depending on who needs to get paid out and the priority of what people get paid out. Equity investors, the first person that gets paid out is your sales agent. I'm not going to overcomplicate it right now, but theoretically, the next people that get paid out are your equity financiers. So the idea is that they give you money, and then you give them the promise that you will pay them back their investment plus a premium. So if they give $50,000 and they have a 10% premium, and typically they're like, the premiums range from 15 to 20. So let's say that they have a 10% premium, just to make things simple, you would pay them back $55,000 on the back end. Then once all of the equity financiers are paid back, once everyone is paid back, then you have a net profit. So that means that you take all of the money after everyone's been paid out, their investment plus their premium, and you have some money left over. The equity financier then shares in that profit proportionate to how much money they put in.
Right.
Typically speaking, so this is where it gets kind of complicated, and I don't know if I should kind of go into like the rabbit hole of this, but just, I'm talking like real basics right now. Typically speaking, the net profits are split 50-50. That means that 50% of the net profit goes to equity, to all of the financiers, and 50% of the profits go to the filmmakers. Right. So that means that if you have a net profit of $100,000, $50,000 is going to go to all of your equity financiers, and then $50,000 is going to go to all of your filmmakers. And then when we talk about filmmakers having points or back end percentages, it means that dictates how much of that amount of money they're taking home themselves. And for equity financiers, how they participate in the net profits, it's proportionate to how much money they put in relation to the overall budget. So if $50,000 is, if the overall budget is $500,000, they put in 10% of it, they put in 10%. So they would get 10% of that net profit.
Yes.
So anyway, that just means that equity financiers, the good and the bad thing about equity financiers is that you're basically telling them, we're going to pay you back if we make a profit. Equity financiers are investing in films that they think are going to make a profit. That said, there's no promise. There's, like you said, and you know, in documentary, there's no promise, there's no expectation that films will ever make money. It's a total crapshoot. And part of what you need to think about when you're making your film is, to a certain extent, kind of like, okay, how realistic is it that this film will appeal to a buyer, or like will have commercial viability? And there are various people who can tell you that along the way. To my earlier point, like there are, it's difficult because you'll have people say like, there's not an audience here for this. And you kind of have to push against that a little bit. You know, we got lucky because our bet paid off because there were buyers on the other side of it. And that allowed for us to pay back our equity financiers. And it allowed for them to make a profit. So, but they put that money in kind of knowing that they might not make it back.
Okay.
And you're not, I mean, it all depends on the deal, but at least all of the equity financing that we took, we were not liable for that money if we didn't get it back. You know, it's not like,
okay.
It's not like people, it's not like you're not indebted through equity. You just, I mean, you then have financiers that are maybe disappointed that their financing didn't pay off. But between all of us, these are folks that are, because the reason that they put money into these is that our project, along with most other projects that you definitely should get fiscal sponsorship. So fiscal sponsorship means that your film is basically qualifies to be, any contributions to it to be tax deductible. And so when folks put in money towards your film, from a granting perspective, they're putting in money so that they can get a tax deduction. When they're putting it through equity, between all of us, like they're not doing it necessarily because they're expecting to get their money back. Like a lot of them see this as like philanthropy. A lot of them want to get their money back so they can continue putting money in through it into making, investing in independent film. But this, like investing in documentary independent film, it's not an incredibly reliable.
Sure.
So just don't expect that like it'll need to, like you'll be indebted to them because of it.
Sure.
Yeah.
I guess the thing is that with equity, you know that person or a group of people are taking a percentage of your film in order for you to cross the finish line. So then it also stands to reckon that you need to make sure that you're getting, like you talked about, you invested sweat equity into your film, right? So then how do you, so you have one budget that maybe goes to grantors,
right?
But then it's a different budget when you're going to investors. And then the other question is that, but I've also heard that like investors don't want to pay for work that's already been done. But it's like you invested sweat equity for 3 years before, so then how does that work out, or is that just a wash?
Well, I mean, that's a great question. Okay, so there's 2 ways that this can work out. One is that, so traditionally speaking, again, like net profits are split 50-50. What has happened more recently, not all investors, and actually very few investors will agree to this. We did it in our film, and we fought very hard for it. But instead of splitting net profits 50-50, we made it so that the investors are looking at, they're making a profit basically, again, in relation to how much money they put into the film.
Mhm.
So just to make things really easy, let's say they put in 50% of the film's budget. Let's say the film is a 500,000. Let's say the budget for the film is $500,000 and they put in $250,000. We make a profit. They are going to take half. So we make a net profit. Half of it goes towards the filmmakers. Half of it goes towards the financiers. If they put in half of the financing, they would take half of that half, if that makes sense.
Mhm.
What is happening as of late, or what you can advocate for, and again, this is just something that you would have to negotiate within your deal terms, is that the filmmakers, let's say the other half of the $500,000 was put in through sweat equity. It was put in through grants, soft grants. It was, so the entire budget wasn't raised through equity. Half of it was raised through other means that is not equity. What some deals will allow you to do is take that half and put it back into the filmmakers pool. So now the filmmakers are making 75% of the back end of the net profits. That's one way that you can account for it. To your question about folks not wanting to pay back money or work that's already been done, I tend to see, I think that's typically true. And I think it just is about smart budgeting, about trying to like basically overinflate your post-production costs or whatever, so that you can then retroactively pay for anything that you had to do through production.
Okay.
So that's the way that at least I've dealt with it, because it's true. I think a lot of investors want to feel like their money is going towards something that, like when you're basically pitching your materials, you're like, hey guys, we need money for the editing, which is going to be $250. Like, it's hard to go to someone and say, hey, we desperately need money for like something that we've already done. And so what I tend to do is I'm always thinking, like when I'm applying for grants, like by the time you get development grants, for example, you're already done with production, like that's why it's like really kind of like, you're always like a step behind when these granting cycles go. And so I always kind of like overinflate the back end of things and try to do the front end of it as cheap as possible. But that's at least my process.
Gotcha.
Your last question, which I just wanted to quickly answer, is that I completely understand why that would be the expectation, but equity financiers such as Impact do not take the film out, typically do not take it out to distributors. That said, there's different ways by which you can get distribution. There's a lot of different ways to skin a cat. So the way that we did it was in order to try to maximize the return, like the sale, because if you sell it at Sundance or sell it in these places are like marketplaces, just psychologically, like there's a lot of competition, and like you can typically end up getting more money for your product than if you were to pre-sell it before a film festival. The other reason that we did it is because if you pre-sell it to a distributor, you forfeit a little bit of creative autonomy. So like if you need the money, like, so this, everything I've described is one way to finance a film. But let's say you have a great idea and you want it to be on Netflix. You can go straight to a Netflix. You can go straight to Netflix, and in that situation, Impact might help set up or like be a part of those conversations. But like you could go straight to a Netflix and say, hey, we actually, want to partner with you on doing this. Netflix would be able to put in a bit, would be able to finance the budget as well. And it would go straight to Netflix, and Netflix would kind of be helpful in trying to get it into festivals if that's the route that they chose to go through. But the thing that you forfeit is like full creative flexibility. Like when you do the independent route and just take equity and granting and then go to a festival and then sell it there, you are able to make the film that you want to make. If you pre-sell it to any of these different distribution companies, then you're kind of, you're going to have to respond to their round of notes, their kind of way, their style of doing it.
Yeah.
But independent of all of this, a sales agent is really helpful in helping you navigate it. And there's dozens of sales agents at varying tiers. You definitely don't need one, but I do find it helpful. And places like Impact Equity Financiers, I mean, I don't know to what extent they do this, but most often they like to partner with sales agents that are doing that work for them.
Okay. Okay. Thank you. Incredibly helpful. Incredibly helpful. Thank you so much. And your film is like so beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much.
So like when I saw that you were doing, I was like, that is a hell yes. I definitely want to hear everything that she has to say. Yeah,
you.
so wonderful, beautiful. Thank you so much.
No, thank you so much.
Cool. Any other questions?
Do have a quick question. How like the difference between when you're trying to raise funds for like a feature-length doc versus a short documentary, is the process different?
Yes, it's totally different. And I will walk through the shorts. Shorts are a disaster of a finance model because
Right.
Because the reason for that is that like no one stands to make any money in making shorts. Like with features, still kind of tough, but there's more of a potential for a reward there. Shorts are just like, they're like, no one became a bazillionaire off of making shorts. That's just like a fact. And because of that, like I always just, the unfortunate reality of our business is that like you have to be aware of what financially motivates people in order to understand the way that they're going to support your film or not. That's fucked up, but it is an unfortunate reality of capitalism. So I think that I made 3 shorts, and I can walk you very quickly through how I financed all of those. So the first one was the most so it was the first film I made in college, and financing for that was like old school, like finance. Like we did a Kickstarter, we did an Indiegogo, we threw keg parties, and we ended up raising, like $25,000 or $30,000, which when you're in college seems like a ton of money. I mean, it is a lot of money. But it wasn't enough money to take us through post-production. And so what we did is we essentially pre-sold it to Univision and Participant Media, who gave us $250,000. And that $250,000 allowed us to edit it. That film was, it's a short, but it was 47 minutes. And we got really, really lucky. Like, that said, like the deal, the terms of getting that $250,000, because it was going to end up on their platform, they had their own kind of priorities about what they wanted to do with the product. And we weren't able to do festivals. We weren't able to do a lot of things that we had initially wanted to do. And so that was kind of, it's very similar to what I'm talking about in terms of pre-selling a feature. It kind of limits your ability to have some flexibility in what you do with the film. My opinion, as someone who has made 3 shorts, is that the benefit and the value for you of a short is that it can feel like it can be a proof of concept in terms of what your filmmaking is like. And also it can like be a proof of an idea. And I see shorts really valuable for that. I personally love consuming shorts, but it's a really hard business model. So moving forward, second short I made, I made a short for OpDocs, and that one was essentially commissioned. So I got $80,000 from Concordia Studio because they were doing a series. They had an agreement with the New York Times, with OpDocs, and they were putting $80,000 to each individual short. And so I ran that. I got $80,000. I ran it through my production company. I delivered it. So that one was very much like, it was an independent doc. It was like completely my own, but the money was already there when I started it. And that's the reason that I did it, is because I was like, I don't want to go out and raise money for a short again. So I'm going to take this opportunity because they're giving me a lot of creative flexibility and because the money's already on the table. The third short that I made was more of a return to my first experience, in that like I co-directed that with my friend Aura, and we did everything ourselves. Like we shot it ourselves, we edited ourselves, we paid for everything ourselves. I mean, we probably put in like $20,000 from our pocket. And then the idea was that to have a similar business model to MIJA, we were going to apply to festivals and then try to get a distributor out of a festival. I was in for a very rude awakening. We ended up getting paid. I mean, we must have invested. We didn't like keep track in total what it ended up being, because a lot of that was also just like time spent away from our work, because we worked on it for 8 months. And we were really like, sleeping in cars kind of situation. And we ended up selling it. I think, I want to say we sold it for 5,000. So like obviously lost a lot of money there, but it got into, so both Darlin and USA v. Scott got into Tribeca. That one we sold to the New Yorker. And they put it up for awards. I mean, it got nominated for an Emmy. It had some traction, but it was a rude reminder that like making shorts, there's not a lot of financial benefit to it, because even on the first two, when there were like the first one where I got 250,000 and the second one where I got $80,000, I didn't make a personal profit on it at all. The money for the first film, all of it went towards post-production. The budget for the second one, I think I ended up making like $3,000 on the whole thing. So shorts, I love shorts, but I do think that the financing model for it is very difficult. So what I would suggest is to try to get distributors on really, really early. That's how I would do it differently. And even if it doesn't afford you that much creative flexibility, having the infrastructure of somebody on board really early will make it so that you're not so in the red when it comes to spending on it. Right. If you really want to use it as a calling card and be like, this is my vision, and you just have to see it as a personal investment in your career. And you just have to be willing to take the financial loss on it.
And I guess the other avenue that we've done in the past is through brand partnerships.
Yeah, totally. That's another one. I actually have never done that, so I can't speak to it, but I do think the irony and the shame is that there's money out there. There's like tons of money out there for people that are interested in making this content. I haven't worked on one yet, but Patagonia has reached out to me a few times about making shorts, and the shorts have nothing to do with Patagonia. They just like have the money and they want to like basically put their logo on the front of it. So you can, I'm happy to share with you the Patagonia contact. Like you can go to brands like this and they're not even like making branded content. Like a lot of these brands are like wanting to get the profile of their brand associated with like independent filmmaking. And it's like, and that's one way for them to do it. So it's not something I've done, but I know that the option is there to get money that way too.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions? I had a question, which is sizzle reel. What's the best way to approach that? Should you have different ones, or with your project, I guess like the lengthwise, like what's a good sweet spot for that?
Oh man, I hate this. Like I asked this question to so many people and like no one would answer it, and it drove me crazy. I ended up making my own version of a sizzle reel, but like, I don't know, like it's what made sense to me. My sizzle reel, which I'll share with y'all, is like 8 minutes. It's a really awkward length. And it's a little bit between like a trailer and a little bit between like a work sample-y thing. So it was like, it was meant to live as like a really short, truncated version of what the film might feel like. But it included some scenes that like felt like they lived in verite. It included the style of the VO. It included a lot of information, but I don't know. I mean, it's what made sense to me, but I think like I wasn't getting great responses in terms of what people were looking for. I think the best place to start, honestly, I think if you don't have a lot of money, and even if you do, I think all your money should be be put towards making the actual film. Like I think that a lot of people get stuck in this kind of like never ending conundrum where like you have to prepare materials to show to people to then try to get money to make your film, and you're spending a lot of time and money on not actually working on your film. And so I feel like the best way to go about it personally is just to do scenes, like start with scenes, like start putting your money and your editing time towards building scenes, and then and start with your most powerful footage. And then you can just use that as a work sample. Like if I hadn't had the money that I had, that's how I would have done it. And quite frankly, even though I'm very proud of our sizzle and I think it did really help, I think what actually would end up sealing the deal for investors was looking at the power of some of our scenes. Like we have this reunification scene of a family that was separated. And that I feel like went even further than a sizzle would. So I feel like first invest in cutting together scenes that hopefully will ultimately end up living in your film. And then if people are directly requesting the sizzle, try to just get a consensus of what people are looking for. Because oftentimes like they just want to be able to look at something to get a sense of the style, get a sense of the tone. And I feel like, you know, do whatever feels right in terms of that. My personal, it's like spend as little time as possible on these sizzles and like try to make it, like I spent so much time on this 8-minute sizzle. It was like making a freaking short. And in retrospect, I wish I had spent, I don't know if that money would have be spent better on something else. So I'll share with you guys my sizzle just so you guys can see what I put together, and it worked. So I don't want to say it didn't, but I do get kind of annoyed about the fact that like the money should go on screen. It should go towards making the film, in my opinion.
Cool. Thanks. John, I see you with your hand up.
Yes, hey, thanks so much, Chris and SDF for putting this on, and thanks, Isabel, for your time today. Um, I've already learned a ton from what you've talked about, and I realized that you were asking questions before you went on to another section, so I'm curious about what that is too. But I did have a couple that I wanted to throw in there. One was that you said your previous shorts barely got to pay yourself, if at all. I'm curious with MIJA if you have been able to actually pay yourself with this feature, whether it's through the deals that you've done or through the actual budget.
Yeah, I mean, so we were able to pay ourselves. I had a $95,000 salary for 2.5 years. So I basically worked on it exclusively full time, and that's not that much money for 2 years or like 2.5 years when you're not working on other things, but I kind of stretched it out. And then I can't tell you specifics, but we made money on the back end. So we did make money, and that was kind of that was a way, like, it to many it might seem like a lot of money, but like I haven't made any money for the last maybe 6 or 7 years. Like it's been and so it almost felt like like when I say like you're investing in yourself on these shorts, like the potential is to be able to pay yourself out in the way that we were able to pay ourselves out on this film.
Another question I had was how and when did Cinetic get involved, that relationship?
So that relationship was a bit complicated, a little bit more complicated than it might be for other people because I'm represented by them. So I started being represented by a manager at Cinetic like a few months since starting. No, I would say like a year into filming actually. And then she kind of had those relationships obviously internally with Cinetic so that we were able to show it to them very easily. And that kind of relationship happened very organically because of it. But we didn't know if they were going to be the best agents. So we went to other folks as well. And that usually happens about the time that you know when you're going to submit it to a festival. Like, I think that's the best time to go to an agent, to a sales agent, is when you know, okay, we're actually going to make the Sundance deadline this year. And then commit to that, because sales agents, once they're on board and if they know that you're applying that year, like they can do a lot of behind the scenes work in terms of trying to like talk to programmers and blah, 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 blah. So I feel like the best time to go to them is when you're like, okay, we're actually going to make this deadline. I actually feel confident that my film is going to be on this year's festival schedule. And that way, like for the sales agent, at least this was our experience, it felt like really fresh and exciting for them. So by the time, I would imagine that like if we'd waited another year, it would still be fine. Like they would still probably have done just as good of a job, but like having that momentum all kind of lining up, I think is really useful for everybody's kind of like work ethic.
I have one last short question, which is how you were able to get in touch with Participant and how that deal ended up happening. Because like you said, shorts are a tough game, but that's sounds like it, even if it only covered your production or your budget, sounds like a good situation.
We got really, really lucky, but I am convinced that you make your own luck. So we got lucky because we started just like, we were working on this film and I was making a lot of photography around it. And so we were kind of putting that story out into the world before the film was finished and saying, but this film, we are currently working on this film is in production. And so we had an article that went up on BuzzFeed. The story was about transgender immigrants that were seeking political asylum. And so there was a photo project that was displayed on BuzzFeed. And then it said like, but we're in production on this film. And like an intern at Univision reached out to me and was like, hey, I think that my bosses might be into this. And that one thing led to another, and Univision had a partnership with Participant at that point in time. And they were looking for projects that were like, that fit the description of what we were making, which were like immigration focused films. So, you know, luck can strike at any corner. Like you always just have to be on your toes, but like just engaging with people. And the other thing that I'll say is like, even now, I just take generals with people all the time. Like I just meet folks all the time, or try to get put in touch with folks all the time, just in case an idea comes up or you're working on something, you then have like kind of the means to put it in front of people and pitch it to them.
Thank you so much.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. All right. I think we got probably time for one more question. Then we'll have to wrap it up. So if anyone out there that has just one last question, the floor is yours. All right. Can you take it as well? I got one. Or internet, you got one?
No, go, Chris, because you're
I'll let you go next. I'll let you go next.
Go.
We'll wrap it up. But Isabel, I know a lot of times with filmmakers, we struggle to kind of keep our subjects motivated. I know even I've struggled with that because, you know, they think it's, you know, just a month process. You shoot it in a month and you can put it out. So what some ways that you kept your subjects motivated and just kept them, motivated through this whole process of fundraising and filming? How did you do that?
It's really hard. It's really, really, really hard. In documentary, I feel like relationships with your subjects are the hardest part of the whole process. I mean, and now I'm dealing with a completely unknown part of, like, unexperienced part of it, a new process of it for me, which is just that, like, this film is getting more and more visibility, and I think that the subjects are having a hard time knowing what that looks like, and now they're having to remain engaged even after we're done filming. Like, they've got a lot of work that's being put on their plate in terms of, like, showing up to panels and festivals and things like that. I think the first thing is just opening up the conversation about reimbursement. Like, I, on MIJA, built in the subjects into the back end, or had predetermined expectations of how much money they were going to get if the film sold. The back end was communicated to some of them, and then to others, like, it wasn't just because I didn't want to get any I didn't want them to get their hopes up about getting any money on the back end. But there was once the film was finished, I did have that conversation with them. And now, as I go into working on stuff in the future, like, I'm trying to figure out even different ways that we can kind of compensate the folks that work in the films. For me, like, my boundary has always been travel, lodging, food. I always pay for that. For Doris, who did VO throughout the film, we gave her a daily stipend for every day that she was working in the VO booth. So small things like that, I think, can be motivating. And especially when, like, y'all have, like, a shared vision about what the point of the film is, to make sure that everyone is reminded of the fact that, like, getting it out into the world will allow you to share that, and put that message out into the world. I think now that I'm even dealing with it on the back end of things, like, having the subjects remain engaged in kind of the promotion of the film, like, we've really advocated with Disney to be paying them stipends and to be paying them really regularly about all of the work that they're being asked to do. But okay, separate from money though, I try to just, like, be very overly communicative about, like, how much time commitment it's going to require. I think for those of you who have watched the film, the two main subjects are Doris and Jax. And Doris was a lot easier to kind of film with consistently, because I moved to LA to live 10 minutes away from her, and we kind of, like, formed a friendship along the way, and it became very easy for me to come in and out of her life. For Jax, it was a lot more difficult, and so I would just have very concerted, focused periods of filming. I'd say, okay, we're going to film for 3 or 4 days, and I'm just going to try to film as much as I can during that time period. And it was just about, like, managing their expectations as well constantly, and saying, like, this might take 3 years, it might take 5 years, so that they, like, were almost even surprised by the time that I was filmed with it, because I was, like, overly pessimistic about how long it would take. And so those are kind of my tricks, but it's hard. It's really, really hard.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And Jeanette, you got the last question.
Okay, so I want to go back to the sales agent. So in terms of, like, figuring out because figuring out who is the best for your film, or like, are they all pretty much the same? Because there's not that many for documentary, or those who, there's Cinetic, Submarine. I don't know.
I think that there's a few. We only talked to Submarine and Cinetic because I was told that they were amongst the best. I don't really know what the difference is between all of them, although I do know that there's some sales agent that kind of their expertise is smaller films, or, like, more arty films, whereas there are some sales agents that we were talking to were the ones that I thought gave us the best chance of getting like a big distributor. Like I wanted
Okay.
something like Disney level. Like I wanted it to be big because I like, and it wasn't even just because of like money or anything like that. Like I just wanted this story about immigration to get to be as visible as possible. Whereas there's possibly other movies that I'm going to want to make that are just like, I see as it being having a different kind of audience. So yes, there are different sales agencies that have different kind of strengths. I will say though that a lot of them do the same thing. Like they kind of do just all go to the same folks and have the same kinds of conversations. So just, you know, talk to everyone and then don't get too caught up in who is or isn't selling it. Like, and oftentimes like, yeah, it just is helpful to have someone in your corner. The thing I will say, I mean, I don't have enough experience to do this myself, but sales agents do take 10% off the top of the film. So unlike every other kind of people that are further down on the waterfall.
Wait a minute. They take 10% of of the selling price or
Yeah.
your budget?
No, of the selling price.
Oh,
So right out the gate, the sales agent takes 10%. In our case, they sold it for a lot more than I would have ever been able to sell for myself because they understood the market, they understood how to negotiate, they understood how to counter negotiate. And so they made up for that 10% and more,
okay.
I think. That said, like you have to kind of be conscious of the product that you're selling, the marketplace that you're selling it, and just like realize whether or not that 10% is worth it too. So it really, every movie's a little bit different. And I know that the best information is power. So like, don't just talk to people. The only thing I will say is like, do not overshare your project to distributors prior to it being done. So do not overshare it to Netflix or Hulu or whatever. Don't overshare it, because it's kind of like you want to make sure that the first time they see it is the best, like
It's in the best shape.
exactly, it's in the best shape, because if not, they like executives are seeing like a bazillion movies a week and like you just want to have the best shot at it. So talk to a lot of people, like talk to a lot of sales agents, but don't overshare materials necessarily.
Yeah. Okay.
Distributors at least.
Yes. All righty. Well, thank you. That is incredibly helpful.
Oh, I'm so glad. Well, I put the sizzle just in the link in the chat. If any of y'all wanted to look at it, because I know I was talking about it. And then otherwise, yeah, feel free. I have the Calendly, and it's now linked up to my Zoom. So whomever wants to sign up for a meeting there is able to.
Cool. Excellent. Oh man, I really enjoyed this conversation today. Again, Isabel Castro, if you're a supported maker of ours, if you have fiscal sponsorship through us, if you received a grant from us, you actually have access to Isabel's calendar to get on there, to set up a one-on-one session with her. You guys see the information that she has, so definitely take advantage of it. Also, if you're a maker out there that wants fiscal sponsorship with us, definitely apply to it. Or if you have any questions about it, email me directly at chris@southernDocumentaryFund.org. We also have a couple of events coming up as well. Our grant, our 2022 production grant, is out right now. Please apply if you're in production with your documentary. Check it out. We have a great info session, our second info session coming up on July 12th at 4 p.m. Sign up for that. Also, we have our next mentorship roundtable next month, July 28th, with Rebecca Ferguson, and she'll be breaking down the whole budgeting game and aspect of documentary. So if you're struggling with your budget and stuff like that, definitely check it out. July 28th from 1 to 2 p.m. with Rebecca Ferguson. Also, if you're in the Columbia, South Carolina area, we have a fresh doc screening. We're showing In the Bubble with Jamie by director Emily Harold. So we'll be showing that at the Nickelodeon in Columbia, South Carolina, 5:30 p.m., July 13th. So if you're in the Columbia, South Carolina area, please come out and check us out and support a fellow Southern documentary filmmaker, and I'll be in the house as well. So again, I want to thank everyone for attending today's session. Also, you'll be getting a survey after this. So definitely fill those out, take the time. It'll only take you about 1 minute. Fill it out real quick for us. That's how we're able to continue these powerful programs, for you guys filling out those surveys for us. So definitely just take the time, a minute, just to fill those out. Again, Isabel, thank you again so much. I really appreciated it. I know everyone here enjoyed it as well. And again, this is our mentorship roundtable with Isabel Castro. You guys have a good day.
Thank you so much. Thank you.